Good time of the day to everyone. Who do you think can be considered the main antagonist of Russian fairy tales? Surely the first one that comes to mind is Slavic dragon, but the second one, of course, is Koschei the Immortal, which will be discussed in this video. You know, the role of Slavic dragon and Koschei in many tales is the same. They kidnap the beloved woman of the main hero, whom the kind young man then has to free, as well as guard some treasures. Therefore, in one and the same fairy tale, Koschei is often interchangeable with Slavic dragon and vice versa. Koschei is a well-known character, but not many people think about who he is and where he comes from. Our task is to figure this out. Koschei the Immortal is a character from Slavic mythology and folk tales. He is depicted as a very thin person, or even a skeleton, a sorcerer, a magician, the ruler of the underworld, or, as it is also called, Koschei's kingdom. He is mentioned in such fairy tales as Maria Morevna, the Frog Princess, Elena the Fair, and others. But where does the name of this character come from? What is the etymology? We have several versions at our disposal. According to one of them, the word Koschei comes from either the word cost, bone, or koshans, sorcery. Other scholars tend to see borrowing from neighboring languages in Russian words. They believed that the name of the living skeleton comes from a Turkic word meaning slave or servant. But here, something does not add up. Koschei does not seem to be a servant or a slave at all. Of course, one can assume that he is a slave of his immortality and suffers. But on the other hand, he knows where his death is and can easily end his suffering. In general, I think that Koschei, in the meaning of slave, has nothing to do with Koschei the Immortal. Some see in Koschei an interpretation of the Slavic god of death, and called Kereshan. Others, the Russian version of the Germanic god Odin. The third group sees him as just a somewhat crazy wizard with great magical abilities. Many modern folklorists in general call for the rehabilitation of Koschei, stating that he is not a villain at all, but rather a certain role model for a participant in a mystery, the initiation of a young girl, which is performed by the father of the initiated. In the fairy tale, Koschei is described as a tall, emaciated old man, and sometimes even a skeleton. His appearance clearly indicates that Koschei has a dark creature associated with death. This is also reflected in the fairy tale proverbs that describe his appearance. Wherever Koschei looks, everything withers. When Koschei is around livestock, livestock dies. When he's around grass, grass withers. Koschei's horse also looked like a skeleton and symbolized the death of a domestic animal. Koschei himself was crowned and armed with a sword, which speaks of him as a king and warrior. In addition, in the fairy tales he is depicted as the possessor of countless riches, a great sorcerer and king who possessed extraordinary power and could turn people into stones, trees, and sometimes unpleasant amphibians like snakes or frogs. His wealth was incalculable. His kingdom was a kingdom of darkness and death, and few of his enemies survived. The heroes who managed to defeat Koschei practically never acted alone. They always had other magicians, magical animals, or people who helped them defeat Koschei, but not in fair combat, but with the help of magic. It was impossible to defeat Koschei in a fair fight, as he was rightly called the Immortal. The death of Koschei lies at the tip of a needle, hidden in an egg. The egg itself is in a duck, the duck in a hare, the hare in a chest, the chest on a mighty oak, and the oak on a deserted island. The broken end of the needle signifies the death of Koschei and the destruction of his kingdom. There is a theory about what Koschei's coveted needle represents. The Immortal is not fully alive, but not completely dead either. He is, as it were, halfway between this world and the next. That is, he is practically the same as the walking dead. Their bodies were committed to the earth, but they rise from their graves and come to their homes as ghosts to haunt their relatives. The only known way to protect oneself from their persistent dead people was to dig up their graves at midnight, find an invisible bone, and destroy it by breaking it, or rather, burning it. Then the dead person would calm down and die finally. If we consider the needle hidden in the egg as the bone of Koschei himself, then it is clear why death caught up with him. In other words, according to this version, Koschei is something of an intelligent and free zombie. In fairy tales, it is not uncommon to hear about the main character finding Koschei locked in a basement. He starts to complain that he hasn't eaten or drunk anything for 10 years and convinces to bring him water. After drinking 10 buckets of water, Koschei breaks the chains, smashes the steel bars, and escapes to start causing mischief. Meanwhile, the consumption of water in such unimaginable volumes in Russian fairy tales is attributed to 2 types of characters. The first type is bogatirs, legendary characters endowed with enormous strength. In battle, they easily deal with opponents. They wave their hand to the left, and instead of a wall of enemies, there is a street. They wave to the right, and there is an alleyway. Bogatirs had thunderous voices, slept deeply, and drank as instructed in buckets. The strength of the episode with 10 buckets gives reason to think maybe Koschei was also a bogatir, just an evil one. This version is chosen by authors of modern Slavic fantasy. For example, in one of today's adaptations of the legend of Koschei, it is said that he was once a great bogatir, but then fell into captivity. He was imprisoned for decades, where he was subjected to cruel torture. As a result, he lost his mind, but not his strength. As a result, Koschei is depicted as a madman whom, whoever, another bogatir, ultimately stops. An interesting interpretation, but Koschei, after all, was not so insane. On the contrary, he was an evil genius, a connoisseur of dark arts, capable of turning enemies into animals, stones, or trees. He could also transform himself into a raven, for example. The second type of creature to whom Russian fairy tales attributed the ability to consume water in buckets were snakes, the very ones the bogatirs constantly fought. According to Slavic tradition, snakes had many heads, could breathe fire, and often attacked people, devouring them and stealing and marrying girls. I already mentioned the similarity between Koschei and the Slavic dragon at the beginning of this video. There is one more thing that links Koschei to mythological snakes. The snake, as a symbol, is present in the legends of many peoples. Often it represents a good beginning and is associated with fertility and the earth. But it also has a dark chthonic side associated with darkness and the underworld. In this case, the snake rises up against the light and embodies all the darkness that can awaken in a person. The chthonic snake has access to the watery world, the realm of the dead and magic. In this sense, Koschei is more than close to a snake. Perhaps he is precisely the creature in which darkness has awakened fully. Or he is like the ancient Greek Hades, the god of the underworld and the dead. After all, practically no fairy tale mentions Koschei's subjects. But what kind of king is he without them? The kingdom of Koschei is mentioned repeatedly, but its inhabitants are not. It is possible that there were no inhabitants there at all. There were the dead, and Koschei sat on the throne of the kingdom of the dead, from where he periodically raided the realm of the living. That's all. Thank you for your attention, and see you in new videos.